Well, here we are with that BSA B25 Starfire that I rode last week in the rain. I may have pointed out that I suspected that there were charging issues, and in fact it was plain to see that the bike was misfiring. If I had the lights on, I could only keep it going when I switched them off. So I suspected anything from the alternator through to the rectifier, bad connections and so on, and I found quite a few bad and dirty connections and poor earths and things like that along the way. Sorted them out. Also the battery was dying, so I've put another battery on. This is just a temporary one, but it's a new one. A bit smaller than it should be, but better than a dying one of the correct size. And I got quite good charging with the lights off, but with the lights on the voltage dropped a little bit lower than I would have liked to have seen it. It was sort of going down into the high 11s, very low 12s if you revved the engine. I checked the wattage of the headlamp because someone's put a sealed beam unit in there, and full beam is 60 watts and dip is 45. The standard should be 40 dip and 50 full beam, so there's a little bit of extra strain going on the system there. But even with the lights on, just side lights, the voltage wasn't great. So I decided that I'd looked at all the connections and bits and bobs, and even the earthing of the Xena diode there, which I'll put some light on that. That converts any excess voltage into heat, and the heat is dissipated by that big finned mounting there. All that checked out alright. Anyway, the connections were good, but I cleaned up where it's bolted and earthed to the frame, which wasn't quite so good, so I got that sorted. And where the lights were sort of flickering and blinking and flashing and whatever, they're now stable, but the charging wasn't really good enough, so I thought I'd take this primary cover off. Look at the filth in that, and check out the alternator, see what it looked like, and check the magnetism of the rotor as well. Now, the stator looks like it's had a little bit of a hard life, so it may be an idea to perhaps change that. And I've checked out the magnetism on the rotor, and that's very good actually. That's probably going to have to go as well, because I can do this. Let's see. So that's not good at all. It's rocking on the shaft as well, so that really isn't good and needs to be changed. Even though the magnetism's good, there's no point in trying to tighten up the nut or change the key or anything, because that is knackered. So that's going to have to come off. So it looks like it's going to be a new rotor and stator at the very least, but also, even with the tensioner in the fully home position, there's excess slack in that primary chain, and the teeth on the clutch basket are very worn. I've never even seen that before. Look at how stumpy those teeth look there. So I'm afraid there's got a little bit of bad news for the owner here, because he bought it as a restored bike. Now, once again, we have a fully restored bike, all ready to go supposedly. It's had all these things wrong with it that I've found so far. Although I've got to say, when I rode it the other day, the engine performed very well. But when you see things like this, you just wonder, well, who restored it, and why did they put those bits back in there? That primary chain is on its last legs, and the engine must have been making a racket because of this, and surely that can't have developed in a time that this bike's been back together and running again, because apparently it's done virtually nothing since it was restored. So I think people just sort of pick up all the bad bits and clean them and put them back in. I really can't get my head around that one, but anyway, I'll be informing the owner what I think he needs here, and then hopefully we'll move on to the next stage, get it charging, get a new primary chain on it at the very least, a new rotor, alternator, stator, possibly even replace the clutch basket there, because those teeth are not good. but there's enough of them, I suppose. Anyway, I'll have to have discussions with the owner, and we'll see where it goes from here. But it's amazing what you find on these so-called restored machines, it really is. Well, here we are now in 2022. Happy New Year. Let's see if we can make it a Happy New Year for this BSA Starfire. I've started stripping the primary side down now because we needed a new alternator rotor. The primary chain has had it, and the teeth on the clutch sprocket drum were worn away, so all that lot's got to be removed anyway. There's also lots of play and slop in that, but also just noticed there's a bit of excessive end float on the gearbox main shaft, which I might have to look into, because when I rode it all the gears worked fine, but there really shouldn't be that much. Whether there's some kind of thrust washer missing, or maybe the nut on the other end of the gearbox main shaft isn't done up as far as it should be or something, I don't know. But I think I'm probably gonna have to run this by the owner and maybe take a look, dismantle the other side part way to get in the other side of the gearbox main shaft, the other end of the gearbox main shaft, and have a look at it and see what's going on for peace of mind. But for now I'm going to get this engine sprocket off, primary chain off, and this off, and have a look. And well, that and that are going to be replaced regardless. Just get them off. I've already ordered the new parts, and see what else I might find as we go along. Right, here we are with that BSA Starfire again, and I'm now looking into what the cause is of the gearbox main shaft end float. And I've already got the outer timing cover off, and I may already have the answer. Hopefully we might be able to see. I've got a head torch on shining in there. Here's the end float, and if we look very carefully we can see that the bearing is moving in the housing there laterally, and most, not quite all, but most of the end float is due to that bearing moving. Also, I don't think the nut is fully home on the threads on the end of the shaft, or perhaps there's the wrong spacer there or washer. I'm going to look into that as well, see what's missing or wrong with that, whatever. But if we look at this old second-hand casing that I've got here, let's see if I can put, there we are. Perhaps it's a bit mucky, but perhaps it'll be possible to see that there's actually a circlip there locating that bearing. The bearing goes in against a sort of blind face, so it should just go in as far as it can, and then the circlip clicks into place to locate it. And if we go back to this one, we should hopefully see, I can see it, hopefully it will come out on the camera, that there's no circlip there holding that bearing in. Now the bearing moving laterally in a casing is not really great, but there's no actual up and down or side to side play in it, so what I intend to do there is get the circlip out of this casing and fit it into that one, and see how we're looking. If I really have to, I'll take this casing off and go into the gearbox and maybe even change the bearing, or put some bearing locking compound like Loctite or something in there to hold the bearing, but I'm pretty sure that overall we'll be alright. If I put a circlip in there, it's spinning nicely enough, that'll probably do the job. So that's where we're at on that one. If we just have a look from the other side, this is the side where I originally spotted the end float. We see it there, and that's too much end float. That could really have an adverse effect on not so much gear selection, but wear on the dogs on the faces of certain gears, which won't be interlocking as well as they could or should when certain gears are selected. So I'm going to get rid of that end float one way or another, but I think fitting a circlip to that bearing will clear most of it up. and then deal with this spacer washer situation, and we might have it all done without needing to go into the gearbox, because in fairness the gearbox worked fine when I rode it, but this end float isn't good for it, and it needs sorting out before it does cause any problems. So that's what I'm going to have a look at next. Here we are with that BSA Starfire again, and I think I've put the end float right in the gearbox now, and everything should be okay. And the end float on the gearbox main shaft, there it is. If we take a look, might be able to see that I've now got a circlip in there locating that bearing and holding it in position. And also, if we look at the nut on the end of the main shaft and compare it with previously, it's screwed on further because that was loose as well. And there's only the very, very slightest perceptible end float there now, which is fine. That's just a few thou. That's alright, but I mean before it was clunk, clunk, clunk from side to side, so I'm very happy with that. And if we go round to the other side, you'll see there's the old clutch chain wheel that I took off, and its teeth well worn down, and also quite a lot of wear on the rear thrust face there. I got a second hand one among my spares and cleaned it up, and it's got good teeth. We've got a brand new primary chain. I haven't even fitted the tensioner yet. There's hardly any play there with a brand new chain, so I know that that's good, and I know that the clutch drum is good and the teeth and everything. I've also shimmed, because this is a second hand clutch drum and it had wear on the back of it similar to that, so I've shimmed it. So just got the slightest sort of free play and movement there. The clutch centre spinning nice and freely inside it. We're actually in gear at the moment. We would turn in the rear wheel with that. You can spin it nice and easily by hand. So all in all, I'm very happy. And if we just check from this end again, barely any end float at all now on that main shaft, which is how it should be. So next up, I'll fit the primary chain tensioner. I hardly have to take up any adjustment at all on it. I've got a replacement rotor for that sloppy old rotor over there, whose centre was becoming detached from the body, and it was clunking and slopping and wobbling. So we may even find a couple more volts on the charging system when I fitted the new rotor. And the next thing I'm going to do is put this lot all back together, and once again I'll time it roughly where I think it ought to be, but I'll have to sort of perfect it with the strobe later on, after I've got it back together and running, to fine tune it probably. But all being well, this will be back together and running again later on today, and that'll be most, if not all, of the mechanicals dealt with, all being well. Just one more thing that I overlooked mentioning in that earlier clip, and I thought, well, we got this cover off, the culprits are in there. Just take a look at those screws and the condition of them, especially that one. Very, very mangled and chewed, and some of the others are not quite so pretty either, but they're in there, they're doing their job, they're holding the casing on. I know it wasn't leaking oil. If for some reason I'd had to remove this casing, I would have no doubt bought new replacements for these screws, but they're in there, they're doing their job. But someone, whoever restored or rebuilt this, actually put those screws back in that state, and that just goes to show some of the cowboys that there are around that claim to restore machines, and there's the sort of evidence of some of the things that they get up to, and we've seen lots more of it along the way with this machine anyway. But hopefully we've turned a corner now, and it's going back together, and hopefully it'll be quite a bit better than it was when it first came here. Right, well here I am back with that BSA Starfire again, and it's all back together and running now obviously. I've had it running for about 5 or 10 minutes. One last job I had to attend to was the gasket there on that little inspection window, which was causing an oil leak down the rocker box and down the pins, and I've put a new gasket on there, which is well sealed, and I'm pretty sure that that's got that sorted out. So I'm just running it for a while just to make sure it stays nice and clean. It's certainly sounding good now. I'm looking at some of the bits that I replaced. Here they are. The old alternator rotor, the old primary chain, and the old clutch drum, which you might be able to see the state of those teeth. There's only about 2/3 of them left. Certainly worn down by an alarming amount, so it's time to replace that. Also, with the core of the alternator rotor being loose against the body of it, it was making nonsense of the timing mark for strobing, and I found out actually when the mark flashed up at full advance with the strobe on it, we were actually far too advanced. So the new rotor is not only quieting the engine down because it's not clattering around, but it's helped by enabling me to get the correct ignition timing as well. So double bonus there with that one. Like I say, I've just been running it just to sort of confirm that it stopped leaking oil. Also the charging. Whether the camera will pick that up, but the light is actually getting brighter as I rev it, so I know it's charging, although the voltage across the battery with the lights on isn't quite as high as it could be, because the wattage of that sealed beam headlamp unit is a little bit too high, at 60 watts full beam and 45 on dip. It should be 50-40. Another thing that was spoiling the charging was when the lights were switched on, the tail light was wired up the wrong way, so we were actually getting the brake light filament lighting with the headlamp, which was, you know, taking out 21 watts instead of 5. So I've crossed the wires over to make that work correctly. There's the primary side, nice and quiet compared to what it was before, with that alternator rotor hammering about inside it and the primary chain thrashing around. So it's looking like I might get out on a ride on it soon. I won't do it this evening, it's starting to go dark. I'm sure that the lights will work well and stay on, but first time out I'm going to do it in the daylight, so possibly tomorrow. Still got the exhaust situation to deal with to do a proper job, but it serves a purpose for now, and obviously the customer might like to know where he's at financially with this, and maybe put off an exhaust system for perhaps a month or two or whatever, dependent on whether he's likely to want to be using this bike anytime soon, or maybe leave it for a couple of months until spring arrives. But it's in with a chance. It's sounding good. I've ridden it before and I know it goes well, so hopefully it'll do better than it did last time, and I'll probably be able to ride it with the lights on, and it should be a little bit less clattery as well into the bargain, all being well. If we look there, that's nice and clean and dry. I'm pretty sure I've nailed that oil leak, so I think that'll be a good point to say we'll round the day off with that one, and switch off, let it cool down, and hopefully, all being well, maybe get a ride on it tomorrow, and hopefully notice and feel some improvements.